There is a place off the southern coast of the Peloponnese in Greece where the water is no more than 4 meters deep and clear enough that on a calm morning you can look straight down and see the outlines of rooms. Not rubble, not scattered debris, rooms with walls still standing at right angles to one another, streets running between them in orderly rows, and the footprints of tombs arranged as though someone had only recently finished marking them out. The city is called Pavlopetri. It has been sitting on the seabed for roughly 3,000 years, and it is not alone. Across the world, beneath reservoirs and coastlines, in lakes and harbors and bays, there are cities that went under, some in a single catastrophic instant, others gradually over centuries, and yet, against every intuition we have about what water does to the things we build, many of them are still recognizable. Their layouts persist, their walls endure, their streets hold their course. The question this raises is not merely archaeological, it is something closer to philosophical. What does it mean for a city to survive when no one has lived in it for 1,000 years and the sea has taken it completely? To understand why this is more than a curiosity, it helps to begin with what we normally expect from ruin. On land, abandoned structures don't last. Wind scours stone, rain dissolves mortar, roots split foundations apart. In dry, exposed climates, mud brick walls can crumble within a few generations. In temperate ones, vegetation reclaims a building so aggressively that within a century an entire neighborhood can vanish beneath a forest canopy. The great enemy of architecture on land is oxygen. Oxygen drives the chemistry of rust, rot, and biological decomposition. It feeds the organisms that eat wood and the reactions that turn iron to dust. Water, particularly still or slow-moving water, changes that equation fundamentally. Submerged environments are often anaerobic, meaning they contain little or no dissolved oxygen. Under these conditions, the microorganisms that break down organic materials, wood, rope, fabric, leather, either cannot function or function so slowly that decay is measured not in years but in millennia. Cold, deep water suppresses this further. A wooden beam that would be unrecognizable within a generation on land can remain structurally coherent for centuries underwater. Stone and brick, which are already resistant to biological attack, become nearly inert when removed from the cycles of freezing, thawing, and wetting and drying that shatter them on the surface. The water does not preserve these cities in spite of being water. It preserves them because of what water excludes: the air, the temperature swings, the relentless biological machinery of the open atmosphere. This is why Pavlopetri still holds its shape. Discovered in 1967 by the marine archaeologist Nicholas Fleming and subsequently mapped by a team from Cambridge, the settlement is roughly 5,000 years old, with origins stretching back to the final Neolithic period around 3500 BCE. It flourished through the Bronze Age, maintained trading relations with Minoan Crete, and was likely submerged around 1000 BCE by the first of a series of earthquakes that progressively pushed the land downward while the Mediterranean slowly rose. Because the area never re-emerged, the town was neither built over nor disturbed by plowing. No farmer turned its stones into field walls. No later civilization scavenged its marble. The sea simply held it in place. What the University of Nottingham's multi-year survey project found, beginning in 2009, was startling in its completeness. Using sonar mapping techniques borrowed from military and oil prospecting applications, and deploying underwater robots developed by the Australian Centre for Field Robotics, the team documented at least 15 buildings, some with as many as 12 rooms, along with streets, corridors, and burial sites arranged across an area that eventually exceeded 9,000 square meters. Large pithari pots from Crete were recovered, indicating the port's role in long-distance Mediterranean trade. Concentrations of loom weights scattered across the seabed suggested that Pavlo-Petri had once been a center of textile production. These were not vague traces. They were the bones of a working economy, a community with industry and exchange and infrastructure, all legible on the ocean floor after 5 millennia of submersion. Pavlo-Petri is the oldest known submerged city, but it is far from the only one, and the mechanisms that sent cities underwater are as varied as the civilizations they erased. Consider Thonis Heraklion, the great Egyptian port at the mouth of the Nile. For more than 2,000 years, it was little more than a name, referenced in ancient texts, mentioned by Herodotus, but never found. Then, in 2000, the French underwater archaeologist Franck Godiot located its remains beneath the sediment and seawater of Abu Qir Bay. What he found was not a minor settlement, it was a major commercial gateway, with massive temple foundations dedicated to the god Amun, red granite columns, colossal statues of Isis and sphinxes, and the wreckage of dozens of ships. The city had likely sunk in stages, undermined by a combination of rising sea levels, seismic activity, and the liquefaction of the unstable clay soils on which it was built. The water and silt covered it so completely that even its precise location had been lost from human memory, which is itself a remarkable fact, that a port city of this significance could become literally invisible for 20 centuries, only to reappear substantially intact. Then there is Baiae, the Roman resort town on the northwest shore of the Gulf of Naples. In its prime, Baiae was one of the most fashionable destinations in the Roman world, a playground for emperors, senators, and the ultra-wealthy, famous for its hot springs and its extravagant villas. Its downfall was geological. The Phlegrean fields, the volcanic caldera system on which it sits, are subject to a phenomenon known as bradycism, the slow rise and fall of the Earth's surface driven by magma movement beneath. Over the centuries following Rome's decline, the ground beneath Baiae gradually sank, taking the city's lower districts below sea level. Today, visitors can dive or snorkel through the underwater archaeological park of Baiae and move among the mosaic floors of Roman villas, the stumps of marble columns, and the outlines of thermal baths, all resting in shallow, sunlit Mediterranean water. The experience is surreal precisely because it is so legible. You can see where a room ended and a courtyard began. You can trace the logic of a building's layout. The city retains its grammar. On the other side of the world, a different kind of submersion produced a different kind of preservation. In 1959, the Chinese government completed a hydroelectric dam that flooded the valley where 2 ancient cities stood, Xicheng, known as Lion City, and Hecheng. Xicheng, built during the Eastern Han Dynasty and rebuilt extensively in the Ming period, sank beneath the rising waters of what became Qiandao Lake, the Lake of 1,000 Islands, in Zhejiang Province. For decades, the city was forgotten. Then, in 2001, a group of divers went below the surface and found it almost perfectly preserved at a depth of roughly 40 meters. Ornate stone archways still stood intact. Guardian lions flanked gates that led to streets lined with carved facades. The cold, dark, oxygen-depleted water had protected even delicate stonework details that would have weathered away in decades on the surface. Xicheng had not merely survived. It looked, in the divers' photographs, as though it were waiting. This is the phenomenon that quietly unsettles us. Not that cities are destroyed by water, which is easy to accept, but that they persist under it, maintaining a structural coherence that feels almost intentional. We associate water with erasure. Floods destroy, tsunamis obliterate, rivers erase their banks. And yet, the evidence from dozens of sites worldwide tells a more complicated story, that under certain conditions, submersion is among the most effective preservation mechanisms known to archaeology. This is not accidental, nor is it mystical. The science behind it is well understood. In anaerobic sediments, the muddy, oxygen-starved layers that accumulate on the beds of lakes, harbors, and shallow seas, chemical equilibrium is maintained in a way that dramatically slows the degradation of both organic and inorganic materials. Once an artifact or structure is sealed within these deposits and its chemical environment stabilizes, it can persist for extraordinary lengths of time, provided it is not disturbed. This is why marine archaeologists often find waterlogged wood that is still structurally coherent after 1,000 years. Wood that, once removed from the water and exposed to air, will begin to crumble within hours unless it is immediately placed into a conservation treatment. The preservation is real, but it is also conditional. It exists only so long as the sealed environment remains sealed. This conditionality is important because it introduces a fragility to these underwater cities that is not always obvious. Pavlo-Petri, for instance, is under active threat. Small boats regularly pass over the site, and their anchors and propellers disturb the sediment that has been shielding the ruins. Larger vessels in Vatika Bay discharge waste and ballast water that introduce chemicals and invasive organisms into the local ecology. Looting has occurred. Plans for a gas pipeline from Crete to the Peloponnese have raised alarm among conservationists. The World Monuments Fund has listed Pavlo-Petri as a site requiring urgent attention, and UNESCO classifies it under its Convention on the Protection of the Underwater Cultural Heritage. But classification and protection are not the same thing, and the paradox of underwater ruins is that the very stillness that preserved them for millennia can be shattered by a single season of careless boat traffic. There is also the broader challenge of interpretation. When an archaeologist excavates a land site, the context is relatively familiar. Soil layers can be read stratigraphically. Structural collapses can be analyzed for their cause. Objects found in a room can be reasonably assumed to have been in that room, or near it when the building was occupied. Underwater, that certainty erodes. Currents shift sediment. Marine organisms colonize surfaces, obscuring or altering them. Objects can be carried away from their original positions over time. The extraordinary visual clarity of a site like Xicheng or Baye can be misleading. It looks like a city frozen in place, but the frozen appearance may mask centuries of subtle, unrecorded rearrangement by natural forces. Still, the information these submerged cities yield is often richer and more detailed than what comparable land sites can offer. Precisely because they were not looted, not scavenged for building materials, not plowed over by subsequent generations, underwater sites frequently preserve evidence that land-based archaeology rarely sees. The trading network of Pavlo-Petri is legible in its Cretan pottery. The economic life of Juliopolis, a city in modern-day Turkey now mostly submerged beneath a dam reservoir since the late 1950s, has been painstakingly reconstructed from clay storage jars, ceramic trade goods, and even chemical analysis of hair from its necropolis, revealing a diet consistent with a prosperous, well-connected urban center. The recent discovery of the Toru Aygir settlement beneath Lake Issyk-Kul in Kyrgyzstan, announced in late 2025 by researchers from the Russian Academy of Sciences, has confirmed the existence of a Silk Road trading city that local legends had described for generations, but that had never been archaeologically verified until divers found fired brick structures in shallow water along the lake's northwestern shore. In each of these cases, the water did not merely preserve buildings, it preserved relationships. trade connections, economic structures, social hierarchies, dietary patterns that are usually the first things to disappear when a city dies on land.
And this is perhaps the deepest insight that submerged cities offer. A city is not its walls. A city is the pattern of life that moved through those walls. The decisions about where to place a market, how to orient a street, where to bury the dead, how to store grain, whom to trade with, and along which routes. On land, that pattern disintegrates almost immediately after abandonment. Vegetation obscures it, later construction overwrites it, scavengers remove its material evidence. But under quiet water, the pattern holds. The market is still where it was. The street still runs the way it ran. The tombs are still in their places, and the jars are still on the floor of the larder, secured exactly as someone secured them 1,000 years ago.
There is something in this that goes beyond the merely informative. It touches on something about the nature of what we build and why we build it. We construct cities as though they are permanent, knowing they are not. Every civilization that has ever laid stone on stone has understood at some level that the structure will eventually fail. And yet they build anyway, not because they believe the walls will last forever, but because the act of building is itself an assertion of order against entropy, of intention against randomness. When a city sinks and the water closes over it, that assertion doesn't disappear. It is simply held, suspended, in a medium that neither honors it nor destroys it, but merely, and this is the strange part, keeps it.
The cities beneath the quiet water are not alive. No one will ever walk their streets again in the way they were meant to be walked. But they are also not gone in the way we typically understand gone. They occupy an unusual category, present but inaccessible, intact but uninhabited, legible but silent. They are records written in stone and brick and pottery, filed in an archive that no one intended to create, maintained by conditions no one designed, and increasingly threatened by the very species that built them.
What the archaeology of submerged cities ultimately teaches is not that water is a miraculous preserver, though under certain conditions it is. It is that the things we build carry information far beyond their intended function. A wall is a wall, but it is also a decision about materials, about orientation, about the expected wind or the feared flood or the direction from which trade arrives. A jar on a floor is a jar, but it is also a node in a network of agriculture, storage, distribution, and belief. When these things survive, as they do under the quiet water, they speak not only to what a city was, but to what a civilization valued, feared, relied upon, and understood about its own position in the world.
The water holds the shape holds the story, and the story, for those patient enough and careful enough to read it, is still being told, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the steady, accumulating clarity of evidence that simply refused to dissolve.